On the night of October 4th, 1967, a string of witnesses across the province of Nova Scotia, Canada, saw a brightly lit object fly over the small fishing village of Shag Harbour and descend upon the surface of the water. A few who gathered at the shore watched the object drift out of sight, leaving a wake of yellow foam on the surface of the water. Though many suspected that the incident was the result of a plane crash, a lengthy search by the police, the locals, and the Royal Canadian Navy revealed no trace of debris in the surrounding water. The object was never found, and the case remains officially attributed to an unidentified flying object. The earliest notice of something strange in the sky came from an Air Canada crew just after 7 p.m. on the night of October 4th, 1967. The crew watched a luminous rectangular object leading a formation of smaller lights fly through the air for several minutes before all objects drifted out of sight. An hour later, police, fishermen, and game wardens all along the coast of Nova Scotia were seeing multiple points of light flying over the water. Reports were made to the Canadian Coast Guard and the National Canadian Police Force, the RCMP. Just before midnight, 5 teenagers driving near the shore in the village of Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia, saw a formation of lights descend rapidly towards the water and start gliding across the surface. Thinking they had witnessed a plane crash, the teens called the police. The RCMP call center reported the incident to the provincial station in Halifax, who then reported it to the national headquarters in Ottawa. The Air Force was also notified. As Ottawa worked with the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax to search for missing planes, the station sent 3 officers to the scene. One of them, Officer Ron Pond, had seen the lights himself earlier that night. He noticed that they seemed to be flashing in sequence, and that they appeared to be anchored to a solid object, approximately 60 feet in length. However, when the officers arrived at the scene, all they could see was a pale yellow light on the water drifting out into the open ocean. Through binoculars, Pond saw the light recede further into the distance before appearing to plunge below the surface of the water. The officers went door to door asking local fishermen to take their boats out to the alleged crash site. Several locals responded, and by 12:30, the Coast Guard had joined them in their search. All they managed to find, however, was a trail of thick, sparkling yellow foam on the surface of the water that stretched for an estimated 800 meters in length. Bubbles could be seen coming up to the surface, and the entire area smelled strongly of sulfur. After a few hours, the Rescue Coordination Center contacted the search party to confirm that no aircraft were missing. Since the situation was no longer considered an emergency, the search was suspended. The next morning, 7 divers with the Royal Canadian Navy searched the floor of the Gulf of Maine for any indication of a crash. They found nothing. Meanwhile, the Rescue Coordination Center continued to puzzle over the cause of the incident. By October 6th, they announced that they had ruled out all plausible explanations, including aircraft, boats, meteors, and flares. Speculation as to the origin of the strange lights ran wild in the wake of the incident, but the mystery never came to any definitive conclusion. In surviving documents, the case was labeled as an encounter with a UFO, in the true sense of the term. The case was even reviewed by the recently commissioned Condon Committee, a university study which purported to assess the scientific and practical merit of ufological research through a review of the available UFO reports. Though the committee was notified of the Shag Harbour incident only a few days after the fact, they declined to investigate, citing the thorough search efforts of local Canadian authorities. Nevertheless, the analysts could not offer any explanation for the sightings, making Shag Harbour one of over a quarter of all cases examined in the study listed as unexplained. For the involvement of an alleged UFO crash, the Shag Harbour incident is often compared to the more famous Roswell incident of 1947. The comparison is also apt in that both cases took on allegations of conspiracy in the years after the initial event. Chris Stiles and Don Ledger, researchers with the Mutual UFO Network, revisited the incident in the early 1990s and uncovered evidence of a second and seemingly related incident soon after Shag Harbour. Stiles' search of the Canadian National Archives turned up a few documents pointing him to the name of a brigadier general who had been involved in this second incident. Stiles contacted the man and learned that the Navy had tracked a submerged object travel north up to a submarine detection center near Shelburne. The Navy dispatched a small flotilla to watch over the object as it rested outside the center. It was joined by a second object some days later. Allegedly, the US and USSR had also been monitoring the situation. A Russian submarine had even crossed into Canadian waters to get a closer look. After more than a week of sonar observation, the two objects were seen to move out into open waters in the Gulf of Maine, surface, and fly away. The Shag Harbour incident is a rare example of what is sometimes called a USO, or an unidentified submerged object. Although how such elusive objects relate to the wider UFO phenomenon is unclear, it seems that whatever's behind it all is beyond the grasp of any world government.